A smile is a good way to show those around you that you mean no harm. A smile whilst passing somebody on the street can mean good morning or good evening. A smile can show that you are okay or happy. A smile can be sarcastic or sincere. A smile can even be uncontrolled, emerging in inappropriate moments as you try hard to keep a straight face. Many smiles out there show joy, although many tell a different story entirely. And this usually positive image can, under the right circumstances, become something far more sinister. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is the Smiling Man. A creepypasta is a horror-related story that has been shared around the internet. However, over the years, it has become somewhat of an umbrella term for any horror content posted on the web, with its contents often being brief and vague, focusing on tales of murder, suicide, and the supernatural. The stories are usually brief, but full of dread, as they aim to strike fear into the reader's hearts. On the other hand, an urban legend is a folklore genre comprising stories that are shared as truth. Although, on occasions such as Slender Man, a creepypasta has become so widely believed that it tiptoes its way over the line towards urban legends. This is a rare occurrence, and most creepypasta remain just that, although it was different on the occasion of the Smiling Man. This was not only because the story is claimed to be an actual depiction of a genuine encounter, but because the story of the Smiling Man was one that unintentionally connected itself to urban legends that already existed in the world. It had inadvertently reawakened the legend and morphed it into something new. An urban legend reborn. In my telling of a story based on the encounters with the Smiling Man, we will follow Keith, who is on his way back home from an evening date, as he heads home down a seemingly ordinary residential road at night. It was late, at least for a Tuesday night when you have to get up early for work the following day, but Keith didn't mind. He had been dating Michael for a couple of months, although that was always out in the town or off on some adventure. It wasn't that he didn't love doing those things, but tonight he could just sit down on the sofa and watch a film with the man that he was falling in love with. They both wanted him to stay, but he had to get back to his flat for his uniform, and he hated staying away from his own bed on a weekday. So he left, deciding to stroll amongst the cool spring breeze of the American East Coast. The stars weren't visible in the sky above the quiet, dark residential roads he strolled through, although the moon would occasionally show its glowing face behind the thinner clouds that brushed by in the darkness. Confident in his stride as a soft smile found its way on his face, his heart content with the path Michael and he was on. His moment was interrupted by the sudden buzz of his phone in his pocket, causing him to yank it out as if by instinct. He looked down at the caller ID to see Michael displayed across it. He chuckled to himself as he answered, putting it to his ear before cheekily saying, "Missing me already?" Michael laughed, answering back, "You left your watch here." Keith turned his head to the path that he had just walked down, contemplating his options in a moment of weakness. "I could come back if you'd like," he flirtily suggested. But Michael quickly shut him down with a playful, "I'm all tucked up in bed now. You had your chance. I'll bring it next time we meet up." Keith smiled, enjoying the flirty banter that only solidified the idea that he had made the right choice in continuing to date this man. "You know, Michael, you don't have to play tricks to make sure I see you again," he replied, causing Michael to laugh out loud before playfully swearing at him, followed by a good night. "Good night," Keith replied, now softer and sincere. He could almost hear the smile on Michael's face on the other end of the phone before they both hung up. Keith continued to gaze at his phone for a moment longer before laughing under his breath once more, shaking his head in delight as he placed his phone back into his pocket. But as he looked back up to enjoy the calm atmosphere of the night once again, something seemed different. The air was almost colder, and the darkness blacker. A man wearing a trilby hat and an ill-fitted suit was standing in the middle of the road under the yellow glow of the streetlights. Although the sight of a suited man standing in the middle of the road in the night was strange, it was nothing compared to what Keith noticed next. The man was standing with his arms lifted on either side of him. It was as if he was preparing to break into a dance as he stared at the moon above. What was most troubling of all, though, was the broad, intense smile on the man's face. His teeth were showing under his lips that were stretched so far apart that there was no way that it couldn't be painful. And yet, the smile didn't change. Not once. Not for a second. Keith slowed his walk until he finally came to a complete halt. He wasn't near the man standing on the pathway, but he would still have to pass this strange smiling man if he was to get home. And this filled him with dread. The man was tall and skinny, the black suit hanging off of his body as if it was a size too big for him. Keith, on the other hand, wasn't a small man and had to remind himself of such. He had dealt with gangs, thugs, bullies, and more in his time. These he could handle, although this was something he did not recognize from any moment in life, and he had no point of reference on what to do. He looked around, checking if he was being filmed by some teenagers trying to get views on a video online, but nobody was there. At least, not that he could see. He looked back to the smiling man ahead, who stood in the exact same position, in the exact same way, with the same smile stuck under his wide eyes that continued to stare into the darkness above. Keith chuckled, thinking to himself, only in America, before continuing to walk again, heading closer towards the smiling man, but ready to pass him as swiftly as possible. He kept a relaxed vibe to his walk, not wanting to show any sign of fear. But at no point did he ever take his eyes off of the smiling man standing so quietly nearby. Keith drew closer, trying his best to maintain a fast pace, although he couldn't help but slightly slow down as he tried to get a better look at the man now to his left. He could feel the discomfort growing inside, feeling on edge, cautious to walk by where he would inevitably have to turn his back to the strange individual. This was made worse when the smiling man suddenly moved, stomping his feet 3 times as if beginning a dance with his arms and face remaining entirely still in their statue-like state. Keith jumped back in fright, irritated by the fact that he had been frightened so easily, as he called out, "What's your problem?" But the smiling man didn't respond. He just stood still once again, staring up at the sky with his large, menacing grin. Keith remained still, staring at the smiling man with his body tensed, ready for his fight or flight to kick in at any moment. But the man did nothing. Keith smirked, dismissively shaking his head, doing all he could to convince himself that he was not afraid as he whispered, "Freak." He continued to walk up the path, keeping an eye on the smiling man over his shoulder, somewhat comforted by the fact that both of their backs were now facing each other. Once he had reached a safe enough distance and confirmed that the man was still not moving, he turned back to the path ahead, taking a deep breath as he attempted to calm his nerves. Still, before his breath could leave his lungs, he heard the 3 stops of the smiling man once again, causing him to stop in his tracks. He turned his head, looking back at the smiling man who was still standing in the middle of the road. Although now, he had completely turned to face Keith once again, his head still tilted up as his manic eyes stared at the clouds above. Keith watched him for a moment, confused about what was going on. But before any more profound thoughts could come to his mind, the smiling man began to move. He stepped forward, his legs still rigid and strange as he swayed from side to side, twirling and swaying as if waltzing with the air. His hands remained up, and his eyes didn't look away from the sky for a moment. All the while this was happening, his painful-looking smile remained. Keith stepped back as he noticed that the smiling man was now heading closer towards him in his trance-like state. Keith took another step back, already moving away from the now waltzing man as he began to pick up the pace once again. Keith turned, now facing his whole body away from the smiling man as he began to scurry up the path, his pride refusing to allow him to run as if trying to prove a point to himself. Although, what that point was, or why it was so important, he'd never know. He continued to check back at the man that still waltzed towards him, growing closer as he swayed and turned in the road with wide, clumsy steps, as if he was a wind-up toy that had finally been set off. Not only was Keith afraid and full of nerves by the strangeness of the situation, but he was also filled with frustration. Frustration that he was afraid to begin with, and that he was trying to escape from a skinny man acting strange. And so, as the need to feel macho and tough began to sink into his core, Keith stopped in his tracks and turned to face the smiling man once again. The man did not seem to care that he had stopped, continuing towards him at the same pace and in the same manner as he had previously done, his eyes still staring up at the sky, his smile still painfully wide. "Do you think you're funny?" Keith hissed at the man in his most resounding voice. This did nothing to intimidate the waltzing man, who continued as if nothing had been said. "What is this?" Keith growled. But once again, nothing. By now, the smiling man was getting dangerously close, and Keith's anger had begun to bubble on top of his fear until he finally demanded, "Stop dancing!" And with that command, the smiling man suddenly came to a halt. Keith watched him curiously as they both stood in silence, filled with nothing but the sound of a raccoon rummaging through a distant trash can, whilst a soft breeze rustled through the treetops. Eventually, the smiling man began to dance again, although this time slower, as he turned and began to waltz back down the road to where he was before. Keith studied him curiously as he continued to twist, turn and sway, growing further away in the shadows of the night, still staring up, still glowing under the yellow lights of the street. Keith didn't know what that was or why it was happening. He didn't know if it was a prank, an insane man, or something else entirely. He would never know just how legitimate the fear he felt was as he turned to walk away from the smiling man once and for all, finally heading home where he could sleep. He pulled out his phone to ring Michael, keen to tell him what had just gone on, secretly needing to speak to someone to feel safe again, reminding him of the normality that still exists in the world. But still, before he could even unlock it to ring him, the air filled with a horrifying and troubling sound as the heavy footsteps of the smiling man began to pace towards him with rapid speed. He turned once again, now seeing that the smiling man was on the path, charging towards him with his gleeful expression clear on his face. Keith didn't wait to see what would happen next. His anxiety had been poked enough this night, and so he turned and began to pace as fast as he could. He turned a corner and charged onto another road, pacing onto a busier street where he was almost hit by a passing car. He stopped by the roadside, finding comfort in all the passing lights surrounding him, no longer feeling isolated and alone. He turned to the road he had just come from, waiting for the smiling man to appear on the corner and follow him to the main road. But he never came. Keith would go home that night and lay in bed with the lights on. He would close every curtain and blind and double lock every door he could. Whenever he would visit Michael in the future, he would get a taxi or a bus. But he would never walk down that road again, not even during the day. He would open up about it to Michael just once, but that'd be it. He would forevermore pretend that his encounter with the smiling man never happened. Although its painful-looking smile would haunt his dreams for years to come. On occasions, he would lay in bed and try to imagine what could possibly have been happening. He even doubted whether the encounter actually occurred, making him feel as insane as the smiling man seemed to be. He would never come to any actual conclusion on what happened that night. But one thing was for sure. He would never look at a gleeful smile the same way ever again. The story of the smiling man first appeared on Reddit under a thread titled "Let's Not Meet," described as a place to read spine-tingling, unusual, terrifying true stories about people you never want to meet again. It was here that Redditor Blue_Tidal told a story that quickly exploded into one of the most famous of creepypasta. What was attractive to many about this was that once the story was posted, dozens of other members began to share their experiences with the same, or at least a noticeably similar, smiling man. Many of these storytellers claimed that they had no idea that others shared their experiences. And although this is an eerie thought, and one that captured the imaginations of many readers, it must be said that it is not out of the bounds of possibility that once the story of the smiling man was put in place, the expansion of its mythos was an inevitable next step. The smiling man exploded across Reddit, haunting the minds of its readers as they pictured the devilish grin and manic eyes that Blue_Tidal had described. And before long, fan art, short films, and several interpretations of the events had begun to form in different sectors of the internet. The most commonly known of these interpretations is the short film 2 AM, directed by filmmaker Michael Evans. It now sits with millions of views, finding an audience of over 1 million in its first 3 days. The film brought to life the scary story told through that Reddit post, and successfully captured the mysterious man's manic, unnerving presence. However, no matter how intense, eerie, or terrifying any of these short films could be, they will be no match for the reader's imagination. It is like what happens when a book is brought to screen. It will rarely live up to your imagination, as what you pictured in your mind as you read was precisely what your mind wanted it to be. On a screen, you can see what the film's director and crew pictured in their minds, which will never truly match. The terrifying notion of that smiling man made it so famous, creating a character that morphed together in the shadows of our minds and crept towards our consciousness with its menacing grin. Like a clown, the most significant discomfort comes from the unnerving atmosphere around something that should be completely welcome. A smile. Scientists at the University of Minnesota in North America researched the science behind a smile. They tried to figure out the traits that make up what would be referred to as a winning smile. To understand what it was that could make some smiles sweet, whilst others could be creepy, the researchers created 27 different grins on the same computer-generated face. Each smile differed slightly, varying the degree of crookedness, toothiness, width, and angle. Once compiled, the 27 smiles were displayed to 802 participants at the Minnesota State Fair. The participants were asked to rate each one on its effectiveness, genuineness, pleasantness, and emotion expressed. The scientists found that smiles with a low to medium width tended to get a better rating, whilst big smiles were rated as the worst when combined with a high angle and lots of teeth on show. Smiles with a medium angle tended to be more popular, while smiles with a more V-shape tended to creep people out the most. Regarding teeth, open-mouthed smiles seemed to be easily mistaken for contempt or anger. Researchers also found that a slightly crooked smile was more appealing than a perfectly symmetrical smile, as they appear to be more genuine, although it was also noted that extremely crooked smiles brought the participants back to creepy once more. Like many scientific experiments covered in the news, this experiment initially seems random and pointless. However, the scientists intended to understand further how we communicate with our smiles, to help those that have experienced partial or complete facial paralysis, or anyone that may require facial reconstructive surgery. As their understanding of the perfect smile grew, the more they could help improve the patient's social lives and communication skills around the world. It was in 1924 that a psychology student by the name of Carney Landis would change the way that science looked at smiles forever. Although how he did so would be deemed highly unethical by today's standards. He had brought an assortment of fellow pupils, psychology patients, teachers, and even a 13-year-old boy into a room at the University of Minnesota. Inside this room, he had covered the laboratory equipment so it was out of sight. He had also draped a cloth over the windows and hung paintings on the walls to help ease the patients he was working with. You see, Carney Landis wanted to know if specific experiences elicited the same facial expressions every time, such as pain or shock. And in order to find this out, Landis was going to have to ensure that his test subjects experienced both. Landis sat down his test subjects in comfortable chairs and painted lines across their face so he could see their expressions more clearly before he began to commit strange pranks on each of them over 3 hours, consistently photographing their faces to capture their reactions. He would put fireworks under seats and electrocute hands whilst they felt around a box full of frogs, although this would be somewhat mild compared to what came next, as he would bring out a white rat on a tray and instruct the participants to cut off the animal's head with a butcher's knife. And although this all seems troubling and wrong, the eeriest thing that came from it was the experiment's results. He marked that even during the most violent of tasks, the most common reaction from the participants was, in fact, a smile. In today's world, it is widely understood that there are 19 distinct smiles on the human's face. Although, what is fascinating is that out of these 19 smiles, only 6 seem to stem from joy. All of the other smiles are more associated with pain, embarrassment, discomfort, horror, and misery, with some even showing signs of contempt or anger. Paula Niedenthal, a psychologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, states that whilst genuine happy smiles exist, the non-enjoyment smiles are less about your emotions and far more about what you want to signal to others around you. Some smiles evolve to signal that we are non-threatening, whilst others have evolved to let people know, without aggression, that we are superior to them. Many of them are polite gestures to demonstrate that we are following the rules. However, they can also be used as an effective way to manipulate others, or to distract them from what we truly feel deep down, bringing forward the somewhat sad realization that often the smile is nothing but a mask. In the 19th century, neurologist Duchenne de Boulogne had an affinity for electrocuting his patients and was even a founding father of electrotherapy. He found himself fascinated by the mechanics of facial expressions, including how the muscles of the face contract to produce a smile. Continuing his theme of seemingly electrocuting anyone he could, he decided that the best way to study the mechanics of a smile was to attach electrodes to an individual's face and zap their muscles into motion. Although the procedure was found to be too painful. So painful that Duchenne was left with having to experiment on the freshly severed heads of French revolutionaries. That was until the day he came into contact with a middle-aged man who just so happened to have facial insensitivity, making him an ideal test subject. With the help of this man, Duchenne would go on to discover and photograph 60 facial expressions, each with its own grouping of facial muscles to make it possible. The most famous of these was a wide, toothless grin where the man looked absolutely over the moon, with his cheeks pushed up and the crow's feet visible around his eyes. This facial expression has since been known as the felt or Duchenne smile, and is most commonly associated with genuine feelings of pleasure and happiness. This smile is a big one, although it only requires the contraction of two muscles. First of these is the zygomatic major, which is in the cheek. This tugs at the corner of the mouth, whilst the orbicularis oculi, which surrounds the eye, pulls at the cheeks, leading to the effect that is often known as twinkly eyes. This is commonly seen as a sincere smile. However, in some cultures worldwide, the perceptions of what qualifies as a genuine smile differ, leading centuries of scientists to question just how much of our smile is instinctive and how much of it is cultural. If we look into the characteristics of a chimpanzee, we see that the Duchenne or felt smile holds its closest resemblance to the expression that apes give when they are afraid. When frightened, the bonobo chimpanzee will expose their teeth and draw its lips back so that its gums are exposed. You will most likely have seen this in memes, movies, posters, or even birthday cards. Although, in reality, this is a sign of submission used by low-status apes to appease the more dominant group members. Charles Darwin believed that facial expressions were more or less instinctive for a far more practical reason than we use them today. He believed that raising our eyebrows when afraid was a way for us to increase our field of vision instinctually, whilst the smile chimpanzees give shows that their clamped teeth are not about to bite and therefore no threat is coming from them. Our smiles may very well be an evolution of the same characteristics our cousins hold from our shared ancestors. When babies were studied, it was found that a broad smile can either mean that the baby is happy or in distress. When men were studied, it was shown that they smile far more when around other men that they deem to be of higher status. Modern science shows that smiles are instinctive and very much part of human nature. Studies have proven that by using pictures of you smiling on your dating app, you are more likely to get matched. So it must seem strange that smiles are used so often in horror and scary movies. With a smile being such a big part of our society, we understand it to signify politeness, warmth, laughter, playfulness, joy, and more. And although we may not be able to pinpoint what it is about a particular smile that creeps us out, we will all pick up on the same things. Just like the possession of an innocent-looking doll or the haunting arrival of the vengeful spirit of a child, it is the fact that we know it should be innocent and harmless, and yet, in the circumstances, in that moment, we know that this is not the case. It warps the reality that we think we know and understand. It twists our comforts and makes them something else entirely, forcing us out of our comfort zone without consent. This is why we see the Joker of Batman fame or the Green Goblin of Spider-Man fame as so menacing in their appearance. We often associate a big smile with joy, and when the person smiling is menacing, the joy that they are showing is the joy in your fear, and that is an unnerving visual. The smiling man of Reddit fame may have found himself coming to life in the imaginations of many around the world, and the authenticity behind its legitimacy will never be able to be proven or disproven. Was this just a scary story? Or did this genuinely happen to Blue_Tidal? If this was true, somebody was most likely trying to frighten the writer. If this man was something else, something more sinister, otherworldly or strange, surely somebody would have witnessed the smiling man before these apparent Reddit encounters. Well, if you look into the history of urban legends, you will see that, according to several witnesses through time, they did. The Smiling Man is a moniker given to several mysterious figures that have appeared over the years, with some speculating that they are the same being, the same species, or even a similar alien race. It was sometime in the October of 1966 that two boys by the name of Martin Munov and James Yanchaitis reportedly witnessed a strange-looking figure standing near a fence as they walked on 4th Street. As they grew closer, they noticed that the figure was watching them. A tall man wearing a metallic green suit and a large, unnerving smile on his face as he stared in their direction. The story goes that the boys had heard of violence in the nearby neighborhood, as people had described being chased by a tall green man. So they fled from the unnerving figure as fast as possible. This story varies from telling to telling, and I have doubts about its legitimacy, as the details, including the date and whether the figure chased the boys or not, are different depending on where you find the tale. It seems likely that this was there to cling on to the later sightings of the Smiling Man that would find themselves far more famous in their tellings. It was in November 1966 that the being known as Mothman was reportedly terrorizing the people of Point Pleasant with its wide red eyes and large wings. According to some at the time, Mothman was not alone in the area, as something else was happening close by at the same time. Some have considered them connected, with the Smiling Man becoming part of the Mothman legend. Even I covered the Smiling Man in a segment that delved into John Keel's investigation during our Mothman chapter. Although, in this famous connection to the Mothman legend, the Smiling Man had a name, and that name was Indrid Cold. On Wednesday, November 2nd, 1966, in Parkersburg, West Virginia, Woodrow Woody Derenberger was driving home down Route 77 when he witnessed an unidentifiable vehicle as it appeared to land in front of his truck. Woody would describe this as an old-fashioned kerosene lamp chimney flaring at both ends, narrowing down to a small neck, and then enlarging in a great bulge in the center. Out of this craft would emerge a man-like being in a metallic-looking, dark blue coat, with a significant smile upon his face, simply grinning as he headed towards Woody, who would later describe the man as follows. His face looked like he had a good tan, a deep suntan. He was not too dark, but it was just like he had been out in the sun a lot and had a good tan. His hair was combed straight back, and it was a dark brown, and he seemed to have good, thick head of hair. His eyebrows, his face, his features were all very normal. I don't believe that he looked any different from any other man that you would meet on the streets. Although, he also explained that he wasn't normal. He had a large grin and kept his arms folded with his hands up under his armpits. And strangest of all was that when the smiling man spoke to Woody, his smile did not change, as Woody would explain that the mysterious man was able to talk to him telepathically while standing on the road, just smiling at him. During this conversation, Woody would be told that they meant him no harm and that this being's name was in fact Indrid Cold. Woodrow would later say, "I was very frightened, and as far as I can understand, this was all mental. There were no spoken words from him. I knew what he was asking me, yet he stood there and his mouth did not move. He had a smile on his face. He appeared very courteous and friendly." Their conversation lasted about 10 minutes, during which time Indrid Cold would tell Woodrow that they eat, breathe, sleep, and even bleed as humans do. At the end of their dialogue, he returned to his craft before saying, "We will see you again." As mentioned in the Mothman chapter, it would be over the following month or so that Woodrow would claim that Indrid Cold consistently visited him, and that he even had taken Woody for a ride in his spaceship to his home planet. Indrid Cold would also apparently appear at Woodrow's front door, with his wife and children witnessing Indrid with their own eyes, later coming forward to confirm Woodrow's claims. His story had garnered so much media attention that eventually locals would flock to his house at all hours of the day. They waited in crowds, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous Indrid Cold, with some claiming to have witnessed a spaceship land there. He would continue to tell his story over the next few years, and in 1971, with the help of Harold W. Hubbard, he would author a book-length account of his adventures titled Visitors from Lanulos. His story would also heavily feature in several of John Keel's books, most notably in the famous The Mothman Prophecies. By the 80s, he lived life in a low profile, only corresponding with small groups of people who still believed his accounts. Although, by this point, many ufologists had dismissed his claims as nonsense. Even so, Indrid Cold and Woodrow Derenberger had been immortalized in print amongst the tales of Mothman, without whom, it seems, the smiling man would have been forgotten as fast as he arrived. Many aspects of the smiling man do not add up over the years. In almost every sighting, he is described differently. The only robust and consistent theme is the giant grin on his face, making it far more likely that it is merely a story brought to life thanks to the eerie imagery it welcomes. In stories like Woody's, the smiling man can communicate and is a non-malevolent alien being. In other tales, he is a creepy, otherworldly-looking, dangerous being that is looking to hurt those he captures. Although, to many believers in the tales of Indrid Cold, these inconsistencies do not show plot holes in its narrative. To them, they are simply different beings who share similar traits, a far easier pill to swallow for many believers out there. That being said, the story of the smiling man did not end here, as the previously mentioned John Keel of Mothman fame would later claim that he too was in contact with Indrid Cold. He claimed to have received cryptic phone calls from him during his investigations. Indrid Cold was even a character in the 2002 Hollywood film The Mothman Prophecies. However, in this film, he existed as merely a voice on the end of the phone, and the smiling man was never seen on screen. and this seemed to be where it ended. That was until 2015, when the post of blue_tidal would arrive on Reddit and bring the stories of this eerie figure back to life. Now, I shall end this chapter by reciting blue_tidal's very post that reignited the mystery of the smiling man. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I'd often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment, when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, heading straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. But the closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. But as I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but I kept my eyes on the man, and he didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and the sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away, or I pulled out my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to my mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. But what came out was a whimper. What the f... Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away. Not wanting to turn my back on him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto the better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile. But he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Once the story of the smiling man had exploded amongst the internet forums, and the man himself had become a famous figure amongst horror characters, Blue_Tidal would return once again to add to the Reddit thread, simply saying, "Thanks to everyone who took the time to read. The first time I told this was to my roommate, who was appropriately mortified. The second time was to a friend who simply joked, 'Sounds like he was just trying to party with you.' Most of my other friends seemed to agree that he was either on drugs or going out of his way to try to mess with me. And to the people comparing him to Slender Man, I should add, he was tall. Normal tall. It probably doesn't help my perspective that I'm short. It was weird to write this out, since I've only ever told it to people in person, where I don't have to try and explain his movement. I can simply act it out. And to anyone doubting the truth of the story, I assure you, it happened. I'm not afraid of ghosts, devils, or monsters. It's people that frighten me."
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.